My name is Emily Walker.
My name is Erica Ivins.
And my name is Huang. Today we would like to talk about animal representation in Native American art and how they relate to ideas of authenticity. This owl effigy jar is a relatively recent creation and is estimated to have been made between 1875 and 1900 AD by the Ashwi tribe, which was formerly known as the Zuni tribe in the American Southwest, possibly within the state of Arizona. It is important to note that Ashwi tribe is how the Zunis refer to themselves in Zuni language. The jar is composed of terracotta decorated with white, brown, and yellow paint. We can see that the owl's wide yellow eyes are exaggerated along with its long eyelashes. The ovoid or light bulb-shaped body of the owl is rather simplistic and lacks detail, but the protruding parts on the back and each side of its body do indicate the presence of wings and a tail. Its prominent beak also protrudes out in order to capture the true-to-life features of the bird.
It is likely that this effigy jar specifically depicts a burrowing owl. According to the 2011 Cultural Resource Monitoring of the Colorado River Ecosystem, conducted by the Zuni Heritage and Historic Preservation Office, only two kinds of owls inhabit the Zuni land, the burrowing owl and the great horned owl, both of which are permanent residents. If the artist was portraying an adult owl instead of a fledgling, the jar is likely to represent a burrowing owl, as a great horned owl has tufts of feathers on both sides of its head, a feature that would have been unmistakable when creating the effigy jar. On the other hand, if the artist was depicting a fledgling owl, it may represent either a burrowing or great horned owl.
In the Zuni belief system, as Winston Callistu explains, all animals are our ancestors that have come back to life in a different form. That's why all living beings, even the smallest insect, are important to the Zuni people. It is believed that all animals came out of the underworld along with the Zunis. They serve as the spirits of Zuni ancestors and are often mentioned in prayers and songs. Birds in particular are incorporated into nearly every aspect of Zuni life. Since they are viewed as messengers from supernatural ancestors, their sighting is closely watched. Oral histories tell that, during their migration, the Zuni people were helped by birds. For instance, an owl once helped them to discover how to make corn into something harvestable and soft enough to eat.
The Zuni people are known for their fine pottery, jewelry, and traditional miniature animal and bird carvings known as fetishes. A fetish is a ritual object empowered by ceremony and filled with spirits. These powerful objects are believed to assist in healing, hunting, fertility, and protection. Fetishes serve as reminders of humans' connection to nature, as well as the unique qualities embodied by the animal or figure. The owl fetish specifically serves to protect the home, symbolizing the truth and wisdom to see what others cannot.
However, this owl pot's authenticity comes into question because, beginning in 1875 through the early 20th century, the production of clay owl figurines for a non-native market exploded, often falling into the category of tourist art. Today, indigenous potters only occasionally sell or give these effigies to friends and family. They tend to direct most of their sales to people outside of their tribe.
This raven rattle from the northwest coast also relates to discussions regarding how Native Americans represent animals as well as the authenticity of such representations. This rattle was most likely made between 1850 and 1875, around the same time as the owl effigy jar. It is composed of wood decorated with red, black, and teal paint. The main figure represented on the rattle is a raven, which is referred to as Yal in some native cultures. We can see its head, including its prominent beak, at the top of the rattle. The raven's body itself is composed of several other figures. On its belly, one can see the stylized face of a hawk that has a frog in its mouth. On the raven's back, there is a reclining humanoid figure who is touching tongues with a frog that is in the mouth of a kingfisher. The various features of each of these figures are highlighted through the use of different colored paint, with red paint specifically making the humans stand out.
The raven is an extremely important figure within the mythology of the northwestern coast, as it is said to symbolize both transformation and trickery and to serve as a helper to the creator. Christian White, a Haida artist, states that Raven was not thought of as a god. He was thought of as a transformer, the trickster. He was the being that changed things, sometimes quite by accident, sometimes on purpose. One of the most well-known myths about the raven describes how he steals the light for the sun, moon, and stars, which had been hidden by an old chief. The chief had kept the light hidden so he would not be able to see if his daughter was ugly. In order to free the light, the raven transformed into a human raven child of the daughter and used this position to figure out where the light was hidden. He then stole the light, flying out of the smoke hole of the house, turning his initially white feathers black. Beyond its mythological importance, the raven also serves as a clan figure for many northwestern tribes, including the Tlingit, Haida, Silesian, and Kwakiutl.
Although the raven is the main figure on the rattle, the other figures each embody their own significance. As previously stated, on the belly of the raven, one can see a hawk with a frog in its mouth. According to Native American mythology, the hawk is often viewed as a bringer of messages and change, while the frog symbolizes the sharing of power and knowledge, especially when we see its tongue touching the tongue of another creature. This transfer of knowledge can be seen on the back of the rattle, on which a kingfisher holds a frog in its mouth, which extends its tongue towards a reclined human figure. The kingfisher itself often serves as a sign of abundance and prosperity.
Rattles themselves were an important part of Northwestern culture and served various functions, including facilitating communication with spirits. Raven rattles were specifically used to accompany music within ceremonies and to consecrate gatherings. However, such rattles were and still are sold to white settlers and tourists as part of the larger tourist craft trade. The skilled craftsmanship required to make them causes them to be particularly popular. Like the owl effigy jar, this rattle was likely never used within Native American communities. It was actually presented as a state gift to Hamilton alumnus Eli Root during his position as either Secretary of State or a Secretary of War.
Both of these items within the Wellin's collection relate to the larger discussion of tourist art. Art historians tend to reduce indigenous artwork to utilitarian or functional tools rather than purely aesthetic objects. Commoditized indigenous artwork is often treated as illegitimate, as people assume that producing crafts for the external market causes such artwork to become reflective of non-native interests. If indigenous craftsmen appeal to those stereotypes perpetuated by cultural outsiders, many believe there is a risk that members of the local group may come to believe the same thing about themselves or their past as the outside world does. From this perspective, commodified indigenous artwork reinforces the historical oppression of colonized minorities' cultural practices. It reiterates racial and social inequalities.
Many art historians reject commoditized objects as fake because they conflict with traditional notions of authenticity. However, insisting on the authenticity of an artwork is problematic for many reasons. Firstly, it presumes that indigenous people live in an extreme state of dependence on nature, which in turn implies that their art is primitive. Secondly, it assumes that indigenous peoples lack the intellectual ability to recognize the artistic value of their creation, suggesting that Westerners must be the first to, quote, see the aesthetic quality of a piece. Therefore, people cannot attempt to judge a piece's artistic value on the basis of authenticity without being implicitly discriminative.
Within the context of Native American art, people often correlate authenticity with ritual usage. This tendency reflects the belief that one can possess a fragment of a culture by possessing an object from its original cultural context. The idea of authenticity also further eroticizes in others non-Western cultures. It also threatens artist creativity, as any modification to traditional techniques is considered a symptom of a culture's degeneration or decay. As a result, artisans often have to rely on redundancy and repetition to ensure the apparent authenticity of their creations.
Some scholars have argued that instead of being thought as shoddy fakes or conveyor belt products, tourist art objects may be seen as part of a movement towards mass production that allows further reinterpretation of artwork. Tourist art serves to not only communicate the changing nature of a group's cultural identity, but also display the fine craftsman and mastery of technical skills, which elevates tourist art above the quality of other mass-produced souvenirs. We should thus consider tourist art to be the manifestation of interaction between indigenous and non-native cultures rather than a sign of the destruction of indigenous culture. Tourist art indicates a strong and sustained cultural existence as it brings prestige, pride, and livelihoods to minoritized people. More importantly, tourist art opens up opportunities for indigenous people who are otherwise reduced to manual forms of labor.